to Victor, Quebec, Bandon Ground. Before you go anywhere, would you like to look up the tower?
See you, Mark. Have a good flight.
Margot McCutcheon is a member of an elite group of skilled Canadian women pilots. This August day, she is leaving Toronto headed for Vancouver on a mission recruiting pilots to be anti-pollution spies in the sky in a West Coast branch of Operation Skywatch. In the brief history of aviation, these women's stories are of love, dedication, and spirit.
We got up to 1,000 feet. And he said, "It's perfectly safe, Daphne." Pulls off the power, and it became awfully quiet. And down the plane started going. He said, "See, there's nothing wrong. We can land in this field, or that one, or the one back there." And I was holding onto his arm and suffered through this thing. And that was my first lesson.
I'm an aggressive type of person, and I love seeing you rise. When I got into the airplane and I started going, I remember my instructor going, "Janine, it's okay to be aggressive, but let's get some kind of control here." No, I want to do more spins. I want to spin and spin and spin and spin.
There isn't a day that I don't look up at the sky and wish I was there. I live to fly.
As soon as you leave the ground, you look behind and all your problems are left there.
Though the first flight by the Wright brothers failed to get a mention in their hometown newspaper, manned flight became the major challenge in the early years of this century. After a few shaky starts, it quickly took on a romantic flair. There were heroes, some of whom lost their lives. But it was Charles Lindbergh who really captured the world's imagination and raised it to a fever pitch after his solo transatlantic flight. Battling all odds, women started to enter this domain of man, and there emerged one whose beauty and mystique became the envy of women and the object of men's desires. Amelia Earhart. Soon she and others were setting new speed and height records. Her solo crossing to Paris like Lindbergh before lifted her status to goddess. Women copied her hairstyles, her fashions, and she inspired them to pursue their dreams. Her mysterious and untimely death during a round-the-world flight has immortalized her in the minds of many. But often overlooked was the movement she co-founded in November 1929.
Amelia was there, and Faye Wells, and Louise Thaden, and Ruth Nichols, and all the early gals. And they decided there should be an organization for women to support aviation in general, and women in particular. Amelia Earhart made the suggestion that we name, after thinking about all kinds of silly titles, that we ought to name it for the number of charter members.
And so it became known as the 99s. Based on volunteerism, the 99s encouraged women to get into aviation, which was not an easy task.
This was a man's world, until they found out in 1937 when they let the women fly in the Bendix for the first time. 36, I guess, was the first time. And out of the first three, there were 3 women that placed. And then they began paying a little attention. But that was in 36. And from then on, with the publicity that Amelia Earhart had, Ruth Nichols holding all the records, then they began to be a little more respected.
This respect grew with the advent of World War II. Although not flying combat, women pilots ferried planes, from fighters to heavy bombers. They even towed targets for shooting practice. However, at war's end, when the men came home, the women were removed from the pilot seat and returned to their traditional role. Exclusion from the job market was a setback, and many felt betrayed. But the principles and ideals of the 99s held fast. The need and the passion to fly was strong.
I went up to my father one afternoon after having spent a wonderful day gliding with a friend, and I said, Dad, Mr. Castelli let me hold the stick. I would really like to learn how to fly, and I'm almost old enough. And my dad proceeded to tell me that the only stick that belonged in my hand was a wooden spoon.
After a few hours of terror, I became hooked. And from then on, there was no standing back. I had to get my license. And I did. It was a terrifying experience. The instructor took me up to 4,000 feet and put me into a spin. And I had great fun recovering.
I did everything I could, short of jumping off the roof at home, flapping my wings, until I understood exactly what you needed behind it. I never followed that dream. I didn't think I could do it. And I had my son. I was lying in the hospital. They put my son in my arms. And I looked at him and I said, I want him to have everything. I want him to follow his dreams and do everything in life he wanted to do. And then I reflected back and asked myself, what have I done for myself?
I think I was at a point in my life I wanted to do something, and I just had the opportunity to go up for a flight in an airplane. And that did it for me. That was really one of the most exciting things I ever did in my life. I felt very in control, very free, and I felt this is what I was meant to do.
At first tied only by a bond to fly, these women had unknowingly started on a journey which would become a major part of their already busy lives.
After about 3 or 4 hours of soloing, I was coming in for a landing, and I landed hard. The nose wheel smashed onto the ground. The nose wheel blew off the airplane, and the propeller just mangled into the ground. And I stopped right in front of the restaurant at Buttonville Airport, and I was so ashamed. I wasn't afraid, but I was so ashamed sitting there having everybody run out and look at this dumb lady sitting in a smashed up airplane.
You're already familiar with the routes you'll be flying, so you know you'll be going by Ottawa Rockcliffe Airport. It's a very scenic area, extremely busy.
Membership in the 99s begins with a flying license and a wish to volunteer. Today it is worldwide, with over 7,000 members in 33 countries. The first Canadian chapter formed in 1950, but it was not until 1975, with the advent of the women's movement, that the first Canadian chapter became effective. And it became a necessary support group as these women ventured into the male-controlled arena of the airport.
When I first started flying in the late 70s, there were very few women who were flying, and so it was a very male-dominated field. And when you were out on the flight line checking the airplane, you always felt very self-conscious because you felt people were watching you from the tower, from maybe the other students, the instructors, and you always felt like you really had to prove yourself.
Even to talking on the radio, you felt very self-conscious. You're nervous to begin with, but whether you're going to say the right thing. And I can say this is where the 99s were very supportive. You could talk about these things with the other women and say, has this ever happened to you? How do you handle it? And does it bother you? And you found out that they said, well, I've got another story I could tell you.
It was nice to be able to talk about flying, not just to my instructor or my husband, but to other women who had been flying.
I was very fortunate that I didn't have any opposition to my flying. I didn't have a great deal of support either. Most of the thing I had was indifference. You want to go flying, you want to go skiing, you want to go shopping, do whatever you want. Just come home and make sure dinner is ready.
I couldn't afford to keep it up. I didn't have the support. The 99s got me involved with a friendship organization where we split the cost and we build each other's confidence and take it off from there. And that's truly why I believe that I have come as far as I have today.
So on the sunny morning of June 15th, 66 air crews began the first transatlantic air rally and race from Mars.
Support and confidence led to competition with men. In 1985, Daphne, Margot, and Adele entered the first transatlantic air rally and race from New Jersey to Paris. Challenging their skills in long-range navigation, precision airmanship, and speed flying, the Canadians not only completed the course, but took home a sizable memento of their journey. While proud of their placing, they valued something else even more.
Lots of room for champagne in here.
We were a team and really worked together as a team. And I must point out that women can work together as a team. Some people think they can't, but we put our heads together and we were so determined to do this that we never had any problems.
All you did was fly, all you thought about was flying. And then at the end of the race, we had this wonderful camaraderie that you really, see when you're looking at old war movies and all the buddies get together.
Being equally skilled as their male counterparts only satisfied part of these women's love of the air. For those who wanted to make it into a career, it seemed that nothing had changed since the days of Amelia Earhart. It took until the 70s for the first woman to sit in the cockpit of a commercial airline. The lack of job prospects, coupled with the high cost of flying, was causing many to leave the skies. But then by accident, a newspaper article gave some of these women a new purpose.
In the early days of my license, we used to take children up at Christmas and overfly the city and look at the lights, and that was magical.
Ron Johnson, who was with the ministry, saw the article, and he thought what a wonderful idea it would be to have women who are natural nurturers to fly over the environment and take pictures of any areas that were sensitive. And this is how it started.
And when he came to us and told us about this as an idea, that we should do this, it might be a good thing for our club to do, I thought, that's an excellent thing to do. Environment, that gives us a real purpose to fly. We're not just going to go up there and fly around and burn gasoline. We've got a real purpose for doing something.
Operation Skywatch became the code name for these spies in the sky. The dumping of chemicals and toxic waste was causing alarm throughout the 70s. Pressures were mounting on governments to act. Most were slow in responding. Ron Johnson was employed in public relations by the Ontario Ministry of the Environment. Previously, when working for the FBI, he had specialized in aerial reconnaissance and knew the value of aerial photography in identifying crime.
You know that things are going on the ground, but it's not until you can get in the air and see the exact problem and how it relates to the environment around. And you get a clearer picture of the true environment which is being hampered by some type of pollution.
Working without the sanction of the government, Johnson, recognizing an opportunity with the women pilots to catch polluters, instituted a scenario straight from the script of a James Bond movie. Approaching the building, the pilot made a detour into the locker area. Zeroing in on locker 19, she uses her duplicate key. Seeing the contents, she knows Johnson wants her to go on a mission. She removes the film, the camera, and the all-important map marking her destination.
Every time we went flying, we would go to the box and take out a map of an area where we might be going that particular time. We'd look at it and we would go and look for the specific sites. And it was very exciting because we weren't just tooling around for nothing, we were looking for something. And we felt that what we found was really going to make a difference.
So for the first year, the 99s actually went up in twos at their own expense and flew to different areas that were marked on the topo sheets and photographed various targets for us.
We had these photographs developed and took them into him, and the government was actually worried about what if the press gets a hold of these pictures that we take. It's not going to make them look very good.
Having a mandate to create industry, the government feared photos revealing environmental abuse would hamper economic growth. But it was stories such as this which forced them to act, as the public demanded enactment of environmental standards. Not visible from the ground, this aerial news footage shows a large pocket of treated human waste from Toronto's main sewage treatment plant, which is not dispersing.
Well, you know, when I flew over here, I was like, geez, this is where I live, right there. I could see it, and I could see that, you know, what we could see throughout the whole day was the sewage coming out of the outfall, which is right over there, and generally just flowing back right into the beaches.
Living beside all this water and not being able to swim in it angers Anna Pangrazi and her husband, who live in the beaches area of Toronto. Preparing her own Skywatch evidence, Anna addresses her concerns to an environmental meeting. She knows this is only the start in a long struggle.
It is frustrating because of the bureaucracy in all governments, and they don't move very fast, and there's got to be a political will, so it's got to be coming from the public that we want to clean this stuff up.
They started to send Ron and some of the other technicians along with one of the 99s, and we started to do specific missions.
And it was time for the ministry to pay for the aircraft rental, and the 99s provided pilots, volunteered to us.
Every year, Ron arranged to have a press conference, so there was a lot of exposure, which was very good for the 99s. We became a credible flying club.
Flying Skywatch and learning about what to look for in the ways of pollution was really very easy for us to gather the concept. It was a little more difficult to spot pollution because normally you see sparkling waters and beautiful fields, and this is what you really want to see.
Johnson had to teach the pilots to look for the little things: groups of dead trees, tire tracks, water discoloration, changing landscapes.
We sometimes get to the dead end of a road and we see a circle of black. It's quite obvious from observation that a tanker might have been there the night before, opened a valve and went around the circles. We have found some tankers buried in old gravel pits full of chemicals.
On the water, you can see the discoloration, and occasionally we've been able to follow the line of discoloration, maybe up a creek, and see a factory miles away that's leaching into the creek.
What was good for the ministry was also good for the 99s. Now flying a plane provided by the government meant that the women could log all important flying hours free of charge to improve their ratings, and at the same time fulfill the volunteer mandate of the organization. And there was lots of flying to do. However, the most dangerous polluters are smart, and the results of their dumping and the evidence of their illegal activities only becomes traceable after months or even years of comparing photographic evidence. Flying carefully plotted paths at constant speed and altitude, even when banking, required the pilots to quickly attain the skills of more experienced flyers.
Ron, who's usually our photographer, he'll just motion with his finger, okay, right turn, prepare for right turn now. Left turn, straight and level. Okay, right turn, and it'll be this quick. So you're low level, and 1 minute you're doing this, and you're going like this, and all of a sudden it's like this, and all of a sudden it's straight now. It's right. You don't have time to think. It's just right on call.
Now, having knowledge, the pilots didn't wait for a mission to use their Skywatch eyes. The pollution fighters, armed with cameras, sought out suspicious areas. The concerns of Adele and Daphne took them to Woodbine Racetrack, located in an industrial area of Toronto.
Well, we are always worried about the horses, and it seems in the past years things have been getting worse, and you get a noticeable upswing in horses that bleed internally while they're racing. and even in training, which we never used to get.
Well, basically what we've noticed is, especially when the wind is blowing this way towards the racetrack, we'll be galloping around and you can hardly breathe when you get up to the top turn there. The horses would be sensitive to the pollution because they need to breathe clean air just like any athlete would.
While Adele flies, Daphne, who is also an atmospheric chemist, gathers air samples.
In science, anytime you get numbers, then it helps. And from an airplane, you can get numbers you can't get on the ground.
And we'd like to know what it is. I mean, to know what it is and to know that either if it was harmful or if it wasn't harmful or whatever. I mean, we certainly don't want to wait till it's too late.
Because they weren't permitted to fly below 1,000 feet, the results were inconclusive. The full impact of emissions have never been recorded by ministry officials, either from the air or at ground level. The pollution and the bleeding continue.
When I got up there and I learned how to look for the things that I was looking for, I don't think 2 or 3 minutes would go by in flight before we'd find another dump site. Illegal dump sites all over the place.
Due to public pressure and the mounting number of cases, the Ministry of the Environment formed the Investigations and Enforcement Branch in 1985. Working with technicians and former police officers, the women would now fly specifically assigned missions. But along with this partnership came government insurance regulations. They demanded that each pilot must have logged 500 hours. For Skywatch pilots who had set their own standards and flown for 7 years without incident, this rule would eliminate some of the flyers and threaten the program's existence.
A lot of our pilots had 200 or 250 hours that came out of flight school, so they were very well qualified. They had commercial license, multi-engine ratings, instrument ratings. They were better qualified than a lot of people with 500 or 1,000 hours. So when the government required that we have a base of 500 hours, we really fought for these women because we really wanted them to be able to get their hours flying, to be able to fly with Operation Skywatch.
Then we were no longer just doing this for fun with another friend. We had to make sure that the pilots that were flying the missions were very, very capable. We had the responsibility of other people on our hands.
So we compromised. We said, we'll settle for 300 hours. So I went back to the 99s and said, guess what? We've got Operation Skywatch operating again. And they said, well, now wait a minute. What if there's some liability to the 99s? And we said, oh no, here we go again.
These problems caused a close down for nearly a year, until 1986, when Operation Skywatch became officially airborne. Averaging 200 flights a year, 17 pilots worked on a rotation system, and it was not long before their mission showed concrete results, one of which came uncomfortably close to home.
I was flying one of the technicians over 5 Mile Creek, and they took pictures of one area. I found out afterwards it was my husband's plant. He was fined $25,000, and that really didn't sit very, very kindly with him.
Prior to 1986, the pilot's job was to detect pollution. Now, with the investigators on board, they were to obtain visual evidence to catch environmental offenders, some of whom are very sneaky.
That's what part of environmental crime is all about, is that where there is a law and these people are expected to get rid of their waste and they don't know where to go and they can't see their way to pay the prices that are involved to dispose of their waste, they'll get rid of it in any way they possibly can.
The storing, recycling, and neutralization of hazardous waste material is big business. If not properly handled, these products can cause far-reaching damage to the ecology of a whole region, and unfortunately, by the time damage is visible, it is often too late. Sometimes a lead would arrive from an unlikely source.
We started making some anonymous phone calls to the Ministry of the Environment. By anonymous, although we did not identify ourselves, we were very, very specific as to what was going on inside the fence or the walls of Varnicolor Chemical. We were very specific as to the number of spills, the dates of the spills, the chemicals that were spilled, the quantities. We expressed concern to the ministry that it was, in my opinion, an extremely sloppy operation.
For over 150 years, Mennonites have been farming some of the richest agricultural land surrounding the small town of Elmira. A recent influx of industry had been welcomed as a great economic boost to the area, but what happened was unexpected and frightening. It was discovered that local wells had been contaminated with toxic chemicals. People were forced to pick up their drinking water from municipal supplies. Following this scare, which is yet to be resolved, another source of contamination was revealed.
If you're spilling 100 gallons of solvents, for example, onto the ground, and you only clean up 35 gallons, well, there's 65 gallons that have either gone up into the air or down into the ground, or both.
Alan Marshall, who grew up in Elmira, was soon to be fired from his position at Varnicolor Chemical Limited for revealing the mishandling of hazardous waste at the company's storage facilities.
Okay, that's about 60 miles.
Julie McGuire, a mother of 3 girls who lived in the area, worked with Johnson on what was to become one of Operation Skywatch's biggest cases.
Is this particular one?
And when we first came over, we were doing this plant as well.
Yes.
All of a sudden, you start building a profile over time of what the site looks like. If we flew over a site today that had a lot of lagoons on it years ago, we'd probably see that it was nothing but green grass. But when we go back to the archival files and we can superimpose all those sites that were there years on, so that we're able to pick up that print and give it to the investigator, and they could go right out to the scene and with the inches come up with something that was there before.
The target was a toxic waste disposal facility owned by Varnicolor Chemical Limited. A check on conditions in that area indicated perfect weather for the mission. Varnicolor had been regularly photographed by Skywatch. This flight would reveal if conditions at the location had changed.
Whatever the case may be, we plan accordingly, and then we jump on the airplane and rig up all our intercom and all our cameras, and off we go into the sunset. Safety has always been my major goal. Canada is a huge, immense country, and we do cover a lot of areas. And it's very important that we look at our flying with a sense of safety, not only for our own life, but for the life of the photographers that we carry with us and our investigators.
Mike Hotel Uniform, clear for takeoff, 3-3.
Mike Hotel Uniform, clear to takeoff.
As I started flying with the 99s, I found that they were a special breed of pilots, that it was a real fine-tuned, trained organization that was just special from others who have flown with before.
It's a lot of reported barrels and drums that might have been added or subtracted to the site.
We work as a team, and we communicate back and forth as to what we're doing. The pilot can't see what I can see on the ground, and I'm more or less guiding them, and the communication is there, and it starts to build, and it's a great feeling.
Let me just slow down a little tiny bit.
There's a lot of tight flying, a lot of just saying right, and Julie just whips that around right, and when we're doing that type of work, it's a very tight communication and very quick action on the pilot's point of view.
With the information from Alan Marshall, they knew exactly what to look for.
You see all those vertical drums there, just this side of the water tower right in here, all the barrels? That's the site.
Okay. Hello. And I'll just keep
Julie's
turning.
flying skills took Johnson's cameras right over the target to collect evidence not available from the ground.
Easy right turn. Just keep coming around. Right turn. We're right on top, and if he's on top of us, he's got the sight right below us.
Yep. Looking good.
We were able to fly with some telephoto lenses so that we could actually count the barrels and drums and how they were stacked, and different things that had changed. And I think this is the important thing, showing the changes that the company had applied to their property, which was not consistent to the orders and to the rules and regulations that the ministry laid out for them. No, remember that site when we flew by it?
Mm-hmm. The evidence, clearly visible by comparing the photos, revealed an attempted cover-up of violations. Armed with search warrants, the Ontario Ministry investigators moved in on the plant.
If the site had not been proactively flown in 1988, we wouldn't have that critical piece of information that was used as a basis of comparison to the 1990 case. And through day-to-day operations, small spills and improper storage, solvents, organic chemicals, liquid industrial waste leached through this gravel surface into the groundwater below, and is traveling that direction as we speak.
That direction led through some of Ontario's most fertile agricultural land and towards large population centers.
How dare a company pollute a town? The people that had homes there, the children that were growing up there, how dare one company or a few companies do this to people?
Varnicolor Chemical Limited and its president, Severin Argentin, were charged with 42 counts of improper and illegal storage and handling of industrial solvents.
It seems that human beings live for the moment and don't think of the future. And yes, people have to earn a living, but they're rather ruthless about it.
Laboratory tests from samples taken from the site revealed a positive identification of several hundred toxic contaminants. Material evidence, backed up by the Skywatch photographs, led to a guilty verdict.
Even in the bleakest of economic times, the message had to be that the environment couldn't be a sacrificial lamb to corporate survival.
Severin Argentin received the longest sentence handed out in Canada of any environmental prosecution. 8 months in jail.
A lot of the local businesses and industries sort of felt, here's this poor fellow, he's been, providing employment, he's been running a business, and he's charged with all these environmental crimes. It didn't hit home to a lot of people that they were criminal acts that he was doing until he was sent to jail.
It's outrageous. Totally outrageous.
Even though Argentin and his company refused to pay for the cleanup, he was released after serving 3 months of his sentence. The cleanup on the site began in February, but we are not aware of the long-term impact of this toxic spill, which has been spreading and left unattended for 2 years.
Program, and even though we haven't quite patterned ours after theirs yet, we still have a lot to learn.
There it is, right below, right there.
This is the first official Skywatch flight in the U.S. in which a law enforcement officer has flown.
Aerial surveillance up in the area that I patrol is extremely helpful because I have so much remote territory, but it was through the use of aircraft that I was able to spot the dump site and cite the operator.
The land is owned by Canada, and it's rented by the U.S., so we share a common problem right in the middle of a beautiful river.
99s in the U.S. had invited Margot as international co-chair to hold a seminar for the New York and New Jersey chapters.
Disaster like a hurricane.
Skywatch was spreading, and the Americans were eager to learn of the techniques used in Canada.
These are retaining walls around here.
So I just think Skywatch is terrific. We're very happy in Connecticut to be a part of it and join with New York and with Canada, with anybody.
It fits into the idealism that we have. As we've heard today, we're doing it a little differently, one state to another, but to get it done, somebody to keep an eye out on what's going on, because there's an appalling amount of greed in our world today. Man just will do anything to make that almighty dollar.
It would be wonderful to think that it could spread throughout the world, but we can only bite off a little bit at a time because we're just a little tiny bit on a cog of a great big wheel. So if we can just do a little bit at a time, maybe it will help.
Capable of flying very slowly, the single-engine plane is ideal for observing and photographing the ground. For the Skywatch pilots who boast an unblemished flying record since the start in 1978, they are always aware that they often fly over many miles of inhospitable terrain.
Well, a pilot always thinks about survival. The first thing you think about is, where am I going to land this aircraft if the engine fails? And there is one place to land, that's the top of the trees, believe it or not.
The engines in small airplanes today are so reliable that we don't often think that they're going to quit. But we do think of where might we have to land in case we can't get to our destination. And because of that, it's very important to know how to survive if we do land on a good field that's very remote.
Hey, what's going on over there?
They're eating there, cheating.
All Skywatch pilots are required to pass a survival course in the wilderness. They are only allowed to use what they would normally carry in their planes. Since taking these courses, they have finely tuned their survival equipment.
There are two sides of these courses. One side is the fun, the bonding among us, and just having a ball out there, you know, telling ghost stories and airplane stories around the fire. And the other side is a very serious one, because we do have to be prepared for the situation that we might be faced with someday.
Well, a little bit more.
Any pilot in this country, especially this country, should be familiar with survival in the wilderness.
After spending a day or even a weekend out doing a course like this, it really makes you aware that it's not just common sense. It takes a lot of intelligence and a lot of training to be able to look after yourself. Okay. This is really neat. I would have never thought to do this if I was stuck out in the bush.
With technology changing so rapidly, survival is becoming easier. For example, I always carry my little portable telephone with me. This works off a satellite. You can usually get a signal out. We can call for pizza sometimes, so that makes it a little bit easier.
On 99, go flying by. 99s go flying by.
Eggersville, 1990. Skywatch pilots flew when this raging fire occurred in a tire dump. 14 million of them burned for more than 2.5 weeks, and large amounts of chemicals made their way into the water table. A similar fire started in Quebec that same year.
Last year, I was flying with one of the ministry men, and there are a group of people who were stockpiling tires again, not because they want to extrude oil, but because they get paid $1 a tire to take the tires in for waste disposal.
I've seen some of the same things over 14 years. From the first time I saw it to today, it's still the same mess. And that hasn't been cleaned up, and I'm not privy to the information of why it hasn't been cleaned up, except that it's still there and it's still a problem.
I see that although we just have the one aircraft and we maybe don't even fly it as much as we could, we're collecting a lot of information. In one day's work, we have more pictures than we know what to do with.
Here's where we are at Brantford, and there's the airport.
Committed to their cause, Skywatch pilots reached out further. They want to educate people by showing them what they have seen. In this case, a team of Skywatch pilots take teacher Terry Lynn Brandt and some of her students for a flight over their reserve. With cameras to do their own skywatching, it is not long before they find illegal dumps on their own
really
lands.
hard looking and seeing it from a different light. You're not used to this perspective.
Down here you'll see that there's a lot of junk built up in this area down here. Now that's an illegal dump site. Somebody's just come in there and decided to dump it. What we'd do is we would circle and take pictures of that, and then we would use the pictures in court when we found out who did that to prosecute. In talking to Terry Lynn, she had taught me some very interesting things about the Native people's beliefs. The earth is their mother, and she has a beautiful phrase that she teaches the children, and that is using hard eyes and soft eyes. And I can now see how that has naturally incorporated itself into me as I'm flying over these sites. I hope that we'll be able to give them a different perspective, and it will also help Terry Lynn and her crew take control and take charge of what's going on here.
And Hamilton Tower, Bravo Kill India, beacon inbound for 12 left. And circle E2 372 second. Much altitude for.
As Skywatch passes its 15 years of existence, it has gone through many changes. The pilots still enjoy the skywatching, but are frustrated that not enough is being done.
Environmental crime doesn't necessarily go on between 8 and 4 and Monday to Friday, whereas in the past we were more active in seeking things and finding things on our own, and had a feeling that what we were finding was being looked after. And then as it's progressed to the present day, we're acting more like a taxi driver, which is sort of taking away from our sense of ability to detect things. And I would hope that with meeting with other volunteer groups and other organizations that are also interested in the environment, maybe we'll come up with a little more action.
I believe that if everybody took part, we would have such a large voice, and we could actually do something about it.
One of the ways is through education. But as in the past when Amelia Earhart encouraged women to break barriers, then perhaps today, people like Canada's first woman in space, Roberta Bondar, and the Skywatch pilots can inspire the young to avoid the mistakes of earlier generations.
Maybe 6. I don't know, memory sort of around 6, 7, I can't remember. But this is this wonderful place that you're from. And it also helps when you look up in the black void of space, you see some stars up there and this hunk of rock called the moon going overhead. There's nowhere else up there to go. You look back at the planet Earth and think, gosh, I better get back there and try to keep it in good shape because there's no other home for us. That although we can look up at the skies and they seem infinite, when you're up in space, the Earth is not infinite. And we really need to take very good care of it.
Sometimes I feel that the concept of Operation Skywatch is a great success. But sometimes I'm still frustrated about it.
Our part can be making people more aware of what's out there. I think that when people see the pollution and see the problems, they get more involved.
It takes everyone to save this earth. You can't rely on people that are policing all the time. We're all responsible for the environment we live in.
When I see pictures of the environment that we first overflew, 8-9 years ago, and I see what has happened today because of the cleanup. It makes me feel very, very, very good that even though I was a small part, but I was a part in it.
You need a reason to go flying, and Skywatch gives us that reason. And while we're doing it, of course, we feel that we're protecting our environment as well.
I'm going to make sure this program doesn't die out. It's not experimental for me. It works, and I want to see it continue.
Slip the surly bonds of earth and dance the sky on laughter-silvered wings.
Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
Soar with the eagles as they dance free. Open the book and what do you see? The poison fruit of our humanity. The angels of the sky make this a better place to be. Set your course and be on your way. Birds takes flight, makes everything our way. Keep a million dream alive, the spirit still survives. The angels of the sky, angels of the sky.